everyone. It is 10 o'clock on Monday, November 15th. And I'd like to call the Public Works Committee meeting to order. Are there any, excuse me, first thing we have to do is approval of previous meetings minutes. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any comments, additions? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Second on the agenda is citizens' comments. There are none. We'll go straight to department reports.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I know that we received a comment from one of our partners at the South Carolina Aquarium, Kelly Thorwaldson, that just came in. Could we relax the rules so that could, I believe she sent that just recently to all members of the committee.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can read them on the record. Good morning, Isle of Palms Public Works Committee. I would like to make a recommendation in regards to the potential relaxation of the environmentally friendly products ordinance. I'm aware of the supply chain issue for environmentally friendly food to-go containers. However, paper bags are still being supplied consistently to businesses. It is my recommendation that you relax only the food to-go containers portion of the ordinance and keep single-use plastic bags from being used in businesses and straws upon request. Since litter data collection began on the Isle of Palms in 2018, single-use plastic bags have dropped by more than 50%. That is something to celebrate and an excellent reason to keep this piece of the ordinance intact. It will also remind businesses that Isle of Palms government is serious about reducing harmful plastic pollution in the community and not send mixed messages to business, visitors, and residents. In addition, it is the hope that supply chain issues will not last for 6 months, so I recommend only relaxing to-go food packaging for 3 months and revisit at that time. Thank you for consideration. Kelly Thorwaldson.
Okay. All right. So we're moving right on along to department report.
Donnie, why don't you go there so that you can use the mic, please?
Good morning. For the month of October, our garbage collection was right on task, 184, which is par for the course historically. As you can see, the yard debris collection was down somewhat, and that's because the island was clean. We had gotten caught up. For my vehicle maintenance, we tracked at about $7,400. One large tire for the loader was a big expense, as well as the coolant problem for PW24, which is my 30-yard Mack. Other than that, if there's any questions, that's the end of my report, and I'll turn it over to Robert for his.
Questions here?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Good morning. We'll start off with drainage. We have ED's services that's back on the island, and they've completed the 600 feet of the Forest Trail drainage ditch that we had some delays on due to them having some labor issues. They're going to revisit that ditch again to get a little deeper cleaning, but last week we had those exceptionally high tides and they just weren't able to do that. They've also cleaned the 23rd Avenue ditch, 2 sections of the 24th Avenue ditch. Public Works has cleaned the drainage ditch on 45th Avenue. SCDOT has done and completed the ditch restructuring on Duck and Sparrow. That was something that was listed, I believe, back in September. That's complete. They actually put an asphalt chute to get all that water off of the street at the intersection of Duck and Sparrow. We also had word from SCDOT that the intersection at 41st and Palm will be completed before Christmas. They also have been having some delays due to labor. Facilities, we just have the completion of the lighting at Fire Station 2. We had some elevator service and repairs. and just basically your overall maintenance to facilities. Front Beach and the beach accesses, 46th Avenue, Public Works went in and opened that beach access wide. We installed Moby mats on both sections before and after the boardwalk. We've also completed the additional 50 feet of Moby mat on 42nd Avenue. That's the additional 50 feet we had to put that would reach out to the toe of the primary dune. Up at Front Beach, we've installed, Public Works has installed 50 well lights to the sidewalk, and that's to restore the lighting that was originally there. Been going and doing like overall assessment of all the beach paths and which ones need to be cleaned before next season. We've also cleaned the Waterway Boulevard path. I've met with the landscapers to do Front Beach improvements over this coming winter. We've done some cleanup of Marginal Road and also cleanup of Forest Trail median. And we just had an on-site meeting at 41st, and we're just waiting for the closeout meeting for all the small drainage projects, and also meeting with the Davidson Floyd for the new drainage master plan. Yes, sir.
I see that the landscape company's already started work on Front Beach with some fall flowers and stuff.
Yes, yes.
Looks
So they
good.
removed the old ones and the new ones are in. The goal is to try to have a bunch of it done before the Holiday Street Festival, but we're getting close, so we'll see.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
The 41st Avenue and the three-way stop sinkhole, did you just
Yes.
mention that and said that
Yes.
SCDOT now
Yeah,
has
that-
it on the record?
Yeah, that was reported, I believe, back in
Yeah.
September. I just got confirmation that they will have that done before Christmas.
Okay, great. That's good. And then I've asked this question before, but it's been a while. But when we clean up the connector or have the, our public works and sweeping contract, does Mount Pleasant help with that at all? Or is that strictly an Isle of
No,
Palms
that's-
project?
That's just our. project.
So the entire connector
Yes.
from here over to the
I
mainland?
believe that
Well,
DOT, Donnie, right, they pay for one, I believe, one cleaning over.
One a month.
Yeah.
The city pays for one cleaning a month and DOT pays for the other one.
Well, be nice to get some help from our neighbors.
It
Is
would.
that excuse me, is that just cleaning up the connector or over the sides where they're getting the trash out of the?
That's SADOT, that's separate.
They do
Yes, what I think Mr. Streetman is referring to is the sweeping, just cleaning
But
the,
SCDOT does the trough.
correct.
Yeah, that was way, way back in '89 when that thing was approved. I was talking to some engineers all over the country. And I was like, we need to put in a trough to pick up the oil and all the other debris that's coming off the connector. And they said, couldn't be done. I mean, that's what DOT said. And a few of us on council said, well, we won't sign off on it then. And lo and behold, it was the first one in the country. And they were able to put it in. But
Nice.
that's gotta be a tough job leaning over that rail all day long. But I'm glad we got it. But that's DOT. I've often, thanks for bringing that up, Rusty, because I often wondered what the distinction was.
Right,
And
right.
I'm glad they're doing that.
Yeah, and what I'm referencing is just what we just said to Mr. Chair is that, we clean that connector on a frequent basis.
Right.
And it would just be good if our neighbors helped out a little bit,
Yes,
because
sir.
quite honestly, when you get past the American flag
Yeah.
going towards the mainland, I mean, that's pretty much where our
Jurisdiction
Yeah.
ends.
jurisdiction ends. Yeah. So just want to go on the record on that.
You have a comment?
I do. Are you done, Rusty, or did you have anything more, Rusty? Well, in terms of that.
I'm gonna ask one other question, but
Okay,
you comment on that one. if you
Yeah,
can, if you
I
like.
do agree that it seems like we should be sharing the responsibilities of the connector with our neighbor in Mount Pleasant. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Mhm. Okay. The only other question I've got, Robert, is the removal of the bulk items left by the PSB compactor weekly. Has there been any improvement on that? Or are we still having?
Yes, there has been.
There has
So,
been.
Yeah, we moved signage around. That's where we created, I think it's the 4 or 5 extra parking spots, which kind of squeezed out an area where they could dump the items. I mean, you'll get pallets and Sherry Johnson, she's allowed to dump her bulk items there that we do pick up, but it was just that outside, people coming and dumping random
Okay.
items there. But yeah, that's improved a lot.
Okay, all right. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Desiree, you can probably answer this question. It has to do with the connector. But if I do remember, all those many years ago, the discussion was on the connector on another matter on as far as public safety. In that we have jurisdiction that police officers can pull people over if need be for the whole connector.
Yeah, there's an agreement in place that allows the police department to do that on
Right.
the entirety of the connector.
Last week I saw a Mount Pleasant police officer pulling somebody over. I was just wondering if, I guess do we both have jurisdiction or just one community?
I would think that it would be reciprocal
Yeah.
between both Mount Pleasant and the Isle of Palms Police Department,
Okay.
but I would have to go back and refer to that agreement.
It's not a
And
big
I
deal.
can get back to you, but I would assume that
Like,
it would be
Rusty
reciprocal.
is correct. The city actually ends at high water mark on the intercoastal.
Mhm.
Correct.
But we do have this agreement, goes back 32 years, that we do have jurisdiction over the whole connector. Right,
For enforcement, for
For
traffic enforcement.
right. And also, in emergencies, 911 call,
Correct.
obviously, accidents and things like that.
That's a mutual aid agreement or something like that, isn't it?
No, I think it's a separate agreement
Is it?
for the connector. And
Yeah.
in terms of the cleaning, I believe that years ago, it was the city who felt like the once a month cleaning of the connector was not enough. So that's why the city put it out upon itself to clean it more often,
Right.
which is why we pay one. But we can certainly, reach out to Mount Pleasant and see if they would be.
Right. I
willing.
appreciate this
Yeah.
being brought up because
Mhm.
I get questions from time to time about who is responsible.
And I think,
I-
yeah,
Two or three different issues here.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
so,
we can.
we have the traffic enforcement, we have the cleaning and just overall ownership of the bridge, which would be DOT.
And I would
Which is-
say, it's worth noting that Mount Pleasant has installed many hotels allowed, especially right at the end of the connector, that they are receiving additional tax monies from. There's, you can make a good case that some of those should be directed towards helping us with services related to the tourists that are coming over from Mount Pleasant.
Yep. And the last thing I would say on it, Mr. Chair, is, I think it's a good thing, to Desiree's point, that we decided as a city that it needed to be cleaned more often, because we all go over that connector frequently, and once a month would not be nearly enough to keep that looking good out there. So it's a good thing that we did that. It would just be good for us to get some assistance on it, I think.
Right.
On a
Well, it's
regular
not just
basis.
aesthetics, but it's also safety. Some stuff
Sure.
coming off construction vehicles.
Mhm.
There's some pretty big things out there once in a while.
Yeah.
Right.
Any further questions for the assistant director?
I have a couple of questions as
Go
well.
ahead.
I noticed that we're talking about assessment of the beach paths. It sounded like you were talking mostly from a clearing perspective, but we do have money in the budget for improving paths and exploring footbridges in the
Right,
low
right. Yeah, I was
line.
just looking at the standpoint of which ones are growing in. I mean, we've done a good job with the landscapers this year.
Mhm.
Just this is the time of year to go around when you don't have a lot of people going back and forth to
Mhm.
really see what they look like.
But are you assessing those paths which are problematic in terms of flooding to determine
Not
whether?
at this point, just really how wide they are, how clear they are, if there's anything, if it's deviated a little bit off the path, but yeah, not at this point.
So I think that when, with the budget, we doubled the amount of money for the beach access paths. And I was the one that was encouraging that with the intention that we would be looking at footbridges for the low lying areas that really get to the dune path.
Right,
to
the one
make sure.
currently is 34th, or 34A.
Yeah,
That's the
there's,
ADA one that we are currently working with. right
okay.
now.
So, yeah, there's several that really need
Right.
attention. And then my other question, or just note that, and I mentioned to Desiree that when we had the big tidal flooding, I guess that was weekend before last. In social media, I did ask and encourage residents to post pictures of the flooding in their area. So thought that might be helpful to staff, but also for potential for grant applications with regard to flooding, that documentation could be
Right, so
helpful.
yeah,
as well.
also while that flooding was happening on those days, I went down to document all of our
Perfect.
normal spots and actually inland also where it was coming through the drain. So we do have a lot of pictures.
Great.
Because they were kind of exceptionally high tides.
Right, and I thought just, yeah, for reference, to know when we
Exactly.
do have an exceptional high tide, which areas are the most vulnerable from tidal flooding.
Exactly.
So I don't know if that, you might look back and see if there were other areas that maybe you missed. The crowdsourcing
Sure.
was
Sure.
actually very,
That's
we
right.
got a great response, and I think people wanted to feel like they could share that
Right.
information easily. So that is all I have.
Great,
Very
thank
good.
you.
All right, thank you. Moving on to old business. 5A, update on phase 3 drainage project, small internal projects and Waterway Boulevard path elevation project. That's right.
Yes, so I'll start with phase 3 drainage, the outfall projects. We have opened bids. Last week, we opened bids for the construction of the 30th and 36th Avenue outfall projects. That's going to be on the agenda it's actually on the agenda under new business for you all to consider a recommendation to Ways and Means and Council for an approval of a contract to Quality Enterprises. The two prices that we received was $3.3 million, approximately 3.3, and then 2.27 for the lowest bid, which is what's being recommended. We're discussing now when the notice to proceed will be issued, but once the contract it's executed by the city and the contractor will be able to proceed on that regard. Regarding 41st Avenue outfall, as you all know, that project and the Waterway Boulevard is still under the permitting process, particularly 41st Avenue outfall project. We have submitted at least 3 grants as of today for that portion, which we're hopeful that we'll be successful in identifying or being granted infrastructure funds for the construction of that project. And that one, as you all know, in accordance to our schedule, we would be getting, our goal is to be ready for construction next fall for both 41st Avenue and the Waterway Boulevard project. Moving on to the small but high impact drainage projects, those have been completed. I know that there were some sod that was put in the last week or two on some of these areas. So there's still some punch list items that need to be completed. And then a final walkthrough will be scheduled. And then the Waterway Boulevard, I already talked about being part of the 41st Avenue outfall project. So that's where we are.
Questions?
Question, as far as the low bid for the 2 outfalls, how does that relate to what we originally thought the cost would
Excuse me,
be?
if you don't mind, that's under new business 6B. We have an extensive discussion about that. If you would like to,
Okay,
wouldn't mind waiting on that.
oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, trustee, anything?
No, not right now.
Okay, old business 5B, update on improvements to golf cart path along Ocean Park Plaza.
So an update on this, we had a discussion with Stantec to help us with the development of specifications and the encroachment permit for DOT that would allow us to remove a portion of that curb so that we can safely segregate golf cart traffic coming off of Palm Boulevard and 21st Avenue onto Ocean Park Plaza. We are in the process of executing that agreement. The cost for that, for their work was $3,000, which we felt was reasonable for the work. And once we will execute it, they'll need a couple of weeks to prepare the permit and prepare the drawings that we would submit to SCDOT. SCDOT will take several weeks to review. Once an encroachment permit is issued, we'll be able to procure an actual construction contractor to do that work. So hopefully we can get that done in this winter so that it's ready for the spring. It's small enough. It's not a intense project, so it's a couple, I mean, maybe a day or days,
Yeah.
2 days worth of work.
Well, I just appreciate you following up on it. You know, I am about some of these projects. I think it's a public safety issue above everything.
Mhm.
Done. So,
And it's, to clarify, that we're talking about the path, not the, on the side of the Harris Teeter, but the other
Correct.
side.
On the other
Ocean
side.
Park Plaza.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Most of you think?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Very good. We're going to new business, 6A. Discussion and consideration of ordinance 2021-15, an ordinance to temporarily suspend enforcement of Title III, Chapter 4, environmentally acceptable packaging and products for businesses affected by global supply chain issues due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm very interested in hearing about this, especially if they had a segment on 60 Minutes last night about, you know, supply chain. So do you have anything you want to present?
Well, just to set up the discussion for you all to consider, this ordinance was presented to council last month. It was approved for first reading by title only. Right now, the ordinance is pretty broad and would temporarily suspend all the sections on chapter 4 of the ordinance. Currently, the ordinance as it's written doesn't include the time frame, the time period for which the suspension will be in place. That's something that you all would need to consider potentially making a recommendation to council for this to be presented as part of second reading. I did reach out several weeks ago to the businesses in our Front Beach district and also the marina, asking for additional information that would be helpful to you all as you consider this ordinance. I did not receive any response from anybody up until now. I'm going to reach out again and give him another opportunity before Wednesday when council will consider the second reading. So I don't have anything to offer in terms of what we're hearing from our businesses, other than it's difficult to procure some of these products. I don't know what products. Is it just everything or just, just plastic, recyclable materials? I really don't have any additional insight from them on this regard.
So, the letter from the lady from the aquarium, she was just talking about single-use plastic bags, but not exempt things like the clamshells. And what other products would fall under that title? Do you know?
I think what she was saying is that the city should consider temporarily suspending the enforcement of the polystyrene products,
Yeah.
but not the single-use plastic bags ban. According to her comment, paper bags are not in, there's not an issue with procuring or making available, having available the plastic bags.
So just to be direct and clear on this, even though we haven't heard from any of the merchants, which I will get in contact with them this afternoon and tomorrow, the clamshells would not be exempt. Is that what you understand?
Well, right now, the way that the ordinance is drafted, it would temporarily suspend all regulations associated with chapter 4. I think that there is a desire, I think Councilmember Smith will speak to maybe being more specific about what are the items that the city could grant I guess more flexibility for a period of 6 months, a year, whatever you all decide would be reasonable, but not exempt plastic bags, single-use plastic bags. So therefore, they would still be required to, the use or distribution of single-use plastic bags would still be prohibited if you all just exempt disposable food serviceware.
Okay, taking that into consideration, I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance 2021-15 with the stipulation that it would be for a time period of 6 months.
Second.
So,
Discussion.
a couple things. I think we need to make clear in the ordinance that we are not, this does not apply to what items are prohibited on the beach, because that is part of that section. And Desiree and I talked about making sure it's clear that people will continue to be prohibited items on the beach will continue, and that would include single-use plastic bags, straws, polystyrene coolers and containers, cups and balloons. So that's something that needs to be adjusted in the ordinance.
Do you have an amendment?
Yeah, so I'll make that amendment.
What is the amendment, please?
Well, and I actually have, yeah, so I guess I'll make the amendment that we are specific that the suspension only applies to the section A regarding what business establishments are allowed to be using in their, that only applies to business establishments, so that section B is not covered in the suspension. Is that
So
clear?
what you're saying is that you think that the ordinance should be specific so that only section 346, which spells out prohibited sales and uses, that the suspension only applies to section A.
Right. And I would also like to make clear that this does not apply to single-use plastic bags. Did you include that in your motion?
No, Councilmember Ward's motion was just a time period, which would be for the suspension would be for 6 months.
Okay.
Yes, why don't we treat that amendment first,
Okay.
and then you all can entertain a separate amendment.
We
That
have
was
a-
a second
We have a motion and a second for the amendment.
for the 6-month amendment.
6 months.
This is the original amendment, I mean, the original motion,
first.
right?
Okay, so we're just
It's just a-
focusing on the
just-
time period?
Yeah,
Press
let's
the
do
time.
that.
Okay. Well, so if we're focusing on the time period, I actually think suspension should only be for 3 months. Because hopefully we're getting past COVID supply issues by then, but if we're not, we could, that could be extended. The other is that there is already a hardship exemption in place, isn't there, for businesses, that if they have a hardship, they can apply to the city for an exemption
That,
otherwise?
that only applied to the first year when the city implemented
Okay,
the
so
ordinance.
that's
That's not, no.
not,
Everything that I'm hearing and seeing is that this is gonna extend well into 2022,
well,
the supply chain issues.
okay.
I'm no expert. That's
Yeah.
why, that's why I'm here.
I mean, I would prefer to could just go 3 months, so that's,
Okay, we'll have we got a motion and a second on the amendment and, Nicole, do you need a roll call vote? Okay. All in favor of the amendment, it's as specified as 6 months, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All against.
nay.
Okay, motion passes 2-1. Now we have another amendment, and I'm not quite sure what it is, be repeated, that had not been seconded at this point.
Okay,
Then the suspension is to only apply to businesses.
so there's 2 sections, A and B, in that chapter. Section A applies to the businesses. Section B applies to prohibition of items that you can take to the beach, which should not, that should not enter into this equation. So my amendment would be that this only applies to section A,
Section 346 subsection A.
subsection A, and clearly not to subsection B, which is prohibition of single-use plastic bags, plastic straws, coolers, and polystyrene food containers, cups, and balloons, that those restrictions would continue to be prohibited on the beach. So it really is separate from any hardship that the businesses.
So essentially what that would be is that businesses will be able, for a period of 6 months, they will be able to provide disposable serviceware that falls within this category, but folks would not be able to take these to the beach.
They can't take it to the beach.
If the suspension only applies to what businesses can provide and not to what people can bring to the beach, then yes.
Okay,
May I ask a question?
Just, excuse me, sir, about point of order, we need to have a motion and a second to have a proper discussion. So is there a second? There being none, is there any, are there any other amendments?
Okay, okay. I'm surprised, but, the other would be, to just have this apply to, take, to go containers and not apply to single-use plastic bags, which was the original, ordinance applied to single-use plastic bags. We were the first in the country. Well, I guess, anyways, just restrict to the ordinance to go containers and not, and packaging, and not to restrict or allow suspension of enforcement around single-use plastic bags.
Okay, is that an amendment?
Yes, that's an amendment.
Okay. Is there a second? There being none. yes.
I need to ask a question for clarification if it's,
Okay,
that's
I will
possible.
Second it, just,
Okay.
so, you know, everybody's comfortable with what we're talking
Okay, great. All right. So I'm going back to, I mean, what was provided in our packet was a one-page ordinance 2021-15. And it only applies to businesses. I don't know why we're talking about what people can take to the beach. Why are we including that in this discussion? This only applies to businesses, from what
Well,
I'm seeing.
the way that it's drafted in that ordinance, it just applies to the whole chapter, chapter 4.
Okay,
And chapter 4 has a section that talks about prohibited sales and prohibited uses. And in that subsection is where the prohibition of people bringing these materials to the beach is included. Which I think that if the goal is for just you providing some type of relief for businesses, then the ordinance should be specific to subsection 346, subsection A, rather than A and B. Because the way that city council approved this ordinance 2 years ago, it included both of those prohibitions in the same chapter of the code. So if you're passing an ordinance where chapter 4 is suspended for 6 months, the prohibition on what people can bring to the beach is included in chapter 4. So you'd have to be specific about the subsection that you're referring to so that you don't end up actually lifting the restrictions on what people can bring to the beach. For example, polystyrene products, plastic straws, balloons, and all that. I think that's what Councilmember Smith was
Yes.
getting at, that we be specific enough in this amendment for the temporary suspension so that it only applies to that section that talks about what businesses can provide or sell.
well, thanks for the clarification. That's where I was going. I'm certainly not in favor of us suspending, what people can bring to the beach. Leave that, I'm in favor of leaving that in place and this apply to businesses only.
So if that's the case, then the recommendation is that the ordinance as it's presented for second reading is more specific to what the subsection that you're suspending rather than the whole chapter.
So do we need to reintroduce that?
You can reintroduce an amendment.
So I would like to reintroduce that amendment to allow,
I understand.
okay.
But we do have an amendment on the floor right now, is that correct?
Correct. You have an
Okay,
amendment.
That's right. In terms of just making this suspension specific to takeout packaging and polystyrene and other types of takeout packaging and serviceware. And that it not allow for the suspension of rules regarding single-use plastic bags.
So from a layman's point of view, if I was going to ask a question, let's say I went to a restaurant and got a clamshell to put food in. I bought it in the restaurant, but I want to take it to the beach. I couldn't take it.
Correct.
Any other questions, discussion?
That's if you consider that just being specific to restaurants, what they can bring, sell or distribute.
I mean,
think it's another level
so,
that
uh,
people have to worry about.
Are we, which amendment are we discussing right now? Are we
There's
just,
only one on the floor.
that's plastic bags, allowing for, so first we're discussing whether we should allow or not allow plastic bags to be used in restaurants, period. It really doesn't have specifically have to do with the beach. And that the rationale for that is there is no supply chain. Well, there is not, my understanding is there's not really a supply chain issue around paper bags. I think we see paper bags frequently at many establishments, including Harris Teeter. So providing a paper bag versus a plastic bag is not a supply chain issue. It does not appear. And I think it's important to remember that we were the first in the state and a leader in banning retail plastic bags. I will point out that my understanding is the town of James Island considered doing something similar and offering exemptions, and they declined to offer any suspension of their packaging ordinances. So keep that in mind. I think this is more middle ground to recognize that plastic bags are harmful to the environment and can easily be replaced with paper bags, even in this moment.
So, okay, I got it. So plastic bags would be prohibited.
Continue to be prohibited and not, we would not have a suspension of specifically around plastic bags.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but that's assuming that there's no supply chain issue with paper. We don't
Right.
know that for certain.
That's my understanding is
Yeah.
that there's not a supply chain issue with paper.
Shouldn't we verify that? I mean,
That's from Kelly Thorvaldson is very well versed in these issues and from her letter and my conversation with her, she acknowledges that there are difficulties in obtaining, packaging items right now that would apply with our ordinance or, would adhere to our ordinance, but that paper bags, which I see frequently in many establishments, I don't believe is a problem. And from what her understanding is that they're not a problem. So, and again, I'll remind that we were a leader in restricting plastic bags in the state, and I think we should continue that leadership.
Okay, I'd like to remind the committee that the catalyst for this meeting was discussion and consideration of this ordinance. And a couple of other things been added that we need to talk about. But this is the main reason we're meeting this morning. And I think it's inherent upon us that we make some sort of recommendation to council.
So a motion's on the floor.
Right, and I seconded it.
Right. So now how do you vote?
I've said all I need to say.
Okay,
So all in favor?
I,
aye.
All against? Nay.
Do you all want to reconsider being specific to the section of the chapter 4 that only applies to businesses and not temporarily suspend what people are able to bring to the beach?
Yes.
It's just getting very complicated to me.
I-
And I don't know how we set up the rules. I think what we just did was like, we tell the restaurant, you can keep using the clamshell, but your customers can't take it to the beach. Is that correct? Like a family cannot have a picnic on the beach with something they ordered in a restaurant. It's just like, what are the rules? Everything seems to be shipped in a little bit. And we're not clear and specific and simple. We're still in the middle of a lot of economic problems in this country. And I'm trying to make things to where they're fair, but they're also very clear and very easy to understand.
I think, restaurants are providing takeout for meals, after when someone finishes from a meal, or just they're providing takeout for the meal itself so people can take it somewhere else. I don't know what percentage of people really need to go out on the beach to enjoy their meal. I'd say a large percentage of what's going on is people are taking it back to their homes. But there are, for those that I didn't personally you shouldn't have to go out onto the beach to enjoy your food and take out where if it's going to cause environmental problems. But the fact of the matter is, it's not, this part of the ordinance doesn't just include, it also includes balloons and coolers and other items. I don't believe the intent of changing this was originally supposed to be on what the businesses could provide with their supply chain issues. The fact about what people can take to the beach should be separate and should not be lumped into the
Is
same.
there an amendment being presented or considered?
I mean, I'll reintroduce my amendment that our suspension only apply to item A in section 3-4-6 and be clearly not involve section B, which is the prohibited items on the beach.
If I understand Robert's Rules of Order, if it's just the same amendment that we've already decided on, it cannot be reintroduced at the same meeting.
It can be reintroduced within 24 hours, so you can reintroduce it in the same meeting.
24 hours, is that what it is?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we have the same amendment as we had a little while ago, right?
Correct.
I believe so.
Okay. Is there a second? So there is no second. Just says
So
there's no
the
second before.
amendments that Public Works will recommend to City Council to consider for ordinance 2020-115 includes the suspension of a 6-month period and only applies to disposable serviceware, not including single-use plastic bags.
It only applies to, say that again? Only
You,
applies to serviceware.
to disposable serviceware which includes polystyrene products, but not including single-use plastic bags. So the use or distribution of single-use plastic bags would still be prohibited under the code if this is what council
Single-use
approves.
plastic bags only. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I would, separate from the ordinance changes,
Mhm.
would like to encourage that we direct staff to work with the businesses in encouraging messaging at their establishments about keeping the beach litter free. This could be done with servers and hosts, encouraging this verbally. It could also be done as part of messaging on receipts about keeping our island clean and beautiful. And then moving forward, I believe we should be developing signage with consistent messaging, perhaps working with the Coast is Clean campaign that the CVB has developed for us, so that businesses can have that available for display in their establishments. I've actually had the owner of Acme has talked to me about this in the past, about the city providing some kind of signage along these lines, but providing it to all the businesses as an optional item that they could use to encourage positive behaviors related to litter. So
Okay,
I
so
don't-
we have a recommendation from Councilmember Smith to encourage staff to work with restaurants, is what I understand.
with business, restaurants and retail businesses,
Okay.
But-
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I think we're, we're getting pretty deep into this thing. I do not, I don't approve of us putting extra responsibility on the businesses themselves to police what's taken out of their restaurant and where that goes. I mean, I can understand if we want to have some signage or something that,
Mhm.
that city provided or whatever that reminds customers that they shouldn't be taking those items to the beach, but I don't think, I just don't think we put that much responsibility on the businesses themselves to try to police this thing to the point that if someone goes to their establishment, gets a takeout meal in a clamshell, styrofoam container, that's it. They take it away and, the businesses should not have the responsibility of tracking that down and seeing where that goes. Does it go into the car? Does it go to the beach or whatever?
Well, I agree. I mean, I don't think I agree 100% that the businesses should not have somebody to monitor, like, where are you going? I'm going home. Okay, you're good. Where are you going? I'm going to the beach. No good.
Right,
you know?
right.
It's just,
But-
it's too much.
But I think that was misunderstood. I'm not suggesting that businesses monitor. This would just be to work with businesses to encourage messaging at their establishments, which could simply be having a note on their receipt of, please keep our island clean and beautiful. Encouragement, not requirement. That's, our staff working with businesses on a problem for solutions that are voluntary. And that also providing signage that at least one restaurant owner has requested.
We got a couple of big, well, I appreciate that and thank you very much, but I think we've discussed it enough at this point. I think council's gonna get our message loud and clear. Desiree has to go to another meeting.
Oh, but don't worry, Douglas will cover for me.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, I'm not worried. I'm not worried at all. So if it's okay with the committee, I would recommend that we move on. Okay, so we're going to new business, item B, consideration of approval of a contract to Quality Enterprises in the amount of $2.27 million for the construction of Phase 3 outfalls at 30th and 36th Avenue. You're just demanding for the job. Stephanie, is that right?
I'll tell you what I know.
Okay,
This is the project. We initially received one bid from the current contractor we're using, Gulfstream. We delayed accepting that bid. We opened it back up. We now received two bids, one from Gulfstream in the amount of 3.06 million. A second one from Quality Enterprises, which is the group that has been tunneling the water line between Sullivan's Island and the mainland of Mount Pleasant. They're a big national firm, have kind of shown up locally for that project. I think they're wanting to keep a presence here. And their bid was in the amount of $2.27 million. So a significant savings under the, when compared to Gulfstream. Thomas and Hutton has reviewed their bid, determined it was complete and accurate. They seem to capture everything. They don't think that they've missed anything. So they are recommending to the staff, and the staff's recommending to you that we move forward with this project with Quality Enterprises in the amount of 2.27.
I make a motion
$1 million.
to approve as presented.
Second,
Anything you'd like to add, Douglas?
No.
I'd like to add something, Mr. Chair. I read through the information here on Quality Enterprises. It does look like they're definitely a well-known, well-funded company too. I mean, they've done not only the project over on Ben Sawyer and the Intercoastal Waterway water main, but I think they did some projects, Moncks Corner, different places, and they're based in Naples, Florida. And reading through the material we provided, it looks like most of their projects were either on budget or below budget. Very few of them were actually over budget from what I could read in the material. So
What
looks like a
great
good
idea.
company. Yeah. Wouldn't that be great? That's novel.
wow.
So,
It
Any
has
other
happened here
comments?
too. That sounds good to me, as long as there's no red flags as to why their bid was much lower than the other one.
No.
Okay, we'll have a motion and a second on the floor. We'll call for the vote. All in favor?
aye.
Any against? Motion passes. And now we go to item C, discussion of alternatives to gravity sewer. I think Councilmember Smith has done some research on this.
So,
Yeah.
thank you,
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So I recognize the amount of work that has gone into the city's movement toward providing the option of island-wide sewer, and the reasons that's being promoted. However, I received information from an engineer who's also a resident of many decades and veteran member of the Planning Commission, that there might be another option that's worth considering and encouraging for some homes that was implemented in Vero Beach, Florida. So I had shared this case study that's included in the packet. There's also some other materials that is a little more difficult for any lay person to get through. But it's just in the hopes that it could be introduced for consideration and conversation by our staff and the next council. The case study is produced by the manufacturer, so that's something to keep in mind. But it is pretty easy to read and follow, and it explains a product that the manufacturer Arenco provides, which is effluent sewer, which consists of directionally drilled small diameter main lines that is less time consuming and less impact compared to gravity sewer lines, according to their materials, and individual Arenco septic tank effluent pump packages that allow for primary treated effluent from each residential or property, ultimately going to the city's wastewater treatment plant. I'm not quite sure what the difference is between that and what we do with grinder pumps. But this case study also includes information on page 3 about how they provided incentives for residents to switch to that system. So that alone, I thought was worth us looking at. It might be a good model to consider down the line as a way of encouraging residents to adopt a different system than their current septic tank. I'm not sure, Douglas, if you've had a chance to look at the study and can comment. on
Yeah,
it.
I have, and I would just say that there are a number of ways that, the issue could be tackled of expanding the sewer to every different property that doesn't currently have it. And we have had those discussions with the Water and Sewer Commission staff. There are engineers who would advocate, and basically what this is it is right now, the grinder pumps are all individual lines. This is a community gravity system where it would be one larger manifolded line, a pressurized line, kind of a more designed, centralized system. That's one part of it. The other part of it is a hybrid system where it's partially treated on your property and then pumped in.
Mhm.
But in the long or the short, there's a couple of things to say. First of all, kind of those decisions will really be made by the Water and Sewer Commission and their staff. And they have definitely always only considered gravity sewer as the solution out here. When it gets into the science of why that is, I'm not positive why they feel so strongly about that. The other thing I would say is that our two staffs are meeting every month right now. You'll remember that there was one very kind of general memorandum of understanding that we would work together collaboratively, which we're now doing. But the second step of that was to come up with a detailed MOU of the actual steps in the process that we will take to implement that kind of goal. And we're working on that now. We're having meetings on that. So that would really be the time that we could dig into the details as to, why exactly they are so laser focused on gravity sewer only.
Mhm.
Because we have had that conversation, but we will certainly continue to have that. And I would also add that the component of not burdening people who really can't afford the burden is a primary focus of those meetings.
Good.
That has always been where the wheels come off of this program, is the example of the person who can't really truly cannot afford to tie into the sewer, and giving some latitude and flexibility to allow that to happen. So that will be really at the forefront of those meetings, and that will all come to council for consideration of this future MOU that we're working on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think if there is room to at least look at this with them and say, is this an option that you have already considered and moved on from, or is this potentially something that could be an option for even just some of the island? It is supposed to be less time consuming and less impact compared to gravity sewer lines and less costly. So
Yeah.
Vero Beach
These
They
pressurized
estimated.
systems are certainly much easier to install,
So,
cheaper, and I think that as they describe it to me, you save on the front end with the installation, but then you have kind of constant high maintenance costs in the long run.
okay,
So that's generally how they've explained it to me, that it is cheaper going in, but much
Maybe.
more
Okay.
labor intensive.
that's good to know. So
maintain.
I just really wanted to make sure that
But
that was
we'll-
considered.
Yeah, we'll be sure to send this all to them. It's good, great information, so we'll be sure they have it, look at it, and respond to it.
Okay, appreciate the presentation. No action will be taken at this time. The next meeting date, I think we'll just leave that up to the next committee. Isn't that what we've been doing, Nicole?
other meetings, it's just that we know that it's going to be sometime in January.
Right,
Mhm.
meeting, there will be a meeting sometime in January 2022. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.